What if I told you that thousands of years ago, people that had special powers used to walk among us on Earth? Way back before the Great Wars and before the last Great Earth War, anomalous humans weren't just a legend or a fantasy. Instead, they were a reality. They were born just like you and I. They looked like any other humans. They were just upgraded. In ancient times, they often referred to them as demigods, half human, half god. Heroes like Perseus, the slayer of monsters, or Hercules, who were both the son of Zeus and had a mortal mother. Greek mythology reported many different heroes during their time, and you can't help but wonder, could there be some possible truth to all that? Think about the fallen angels, for example. Fell from the heavens and bred the daughters of man. Then came the giants. And even though verifiable proof hasn't been presented to the masses about giants, many believe that they in fact existed. So is it far-fetched to think that those bloodlines have the genetic traits needed to be an anomalous human? And that once in a great while, those traits will come to light. There's been legend and lore told about anomalous humans for thousands of years. So you can't help but wonder, is it possible? And could there be humans among us today that are anomalous? Now, according to one source I recently got some info from, they say yes, but that's subject to scrutiny. What I'm about to say could very well just be totally fiction. But you know me, I gotta humor it. I gotta play devil's advocate and look into it. According to this source, each powerful nation throughout the world has anomalous humans in their government, and they use them for covert operations. The gift that these people are blessed with varies, from shapeshifting to manipulation of electricity, fire. Some of them are even like Professor X. They can control things and move things with their mind. They can even go as far as getting into your mind, controlling you, reading your thoughts. Apparently the US has fire starters, or those that can manipulate electricity. Russia allegedly has a very strong telepathic female. She uses her power to control a deep sea monster and keep it at bay. This deep sea creature killed Russian divers and sank a Russian sub, and then took every passenger on the sub. It's believed that China actually leads the world in modified humans. While given their population, that makes sense. They either put them in a regular home or use them for covert ops. With DNA analysis, it's usually pretty easy to pinpoint these beings at birth. But once in a while, some of them slip through the cracks. That's why they have covert agencies tasked with hunting them down and capturing them. Again, I want to say none of this is based on absolute fact. There's no evidence to sustain or support these claims. But I gotta say, it sure is fun to wrap your head around it. This is what I live for. And that brings me to the next story. The setting is World War II, and the Japanese Imperial Army had just pushed China out of the Ping Fang district in Harbin. And this is when they would establish the infamous Unit 731. Here is where some of the most horrible atrocities of World War II took place, similar to that of the concentration camps. Headed by Shiro Ishii, at 731, some of the most horrifying human experiments during the war took place here. And most of these procedures were practiced on the Chinese locals. During his time at Unit 731, Ishii also practiced another form of experimentation. It's alleged he was also trying to create super soldiers. Super soldiers are Captain America-like soldiers with heightened powers. It's not very well documented, but it's believed that during World War II, most of the world powers were practicing this. There are no limits to which the world powers would go to gain any edge in combat. Ishii tried for years to produce consistent super soldiers for the Emperor, but eventually the Emperor would scratch the program because he had very little success. Yes, I said very little success. There was some that he was able to create. One of the main focal points of his experimentation was finding anomalous Chinese citizens. Chinese citizens with alleged powers such as shape-shifting or telekinesis. Again, everything I'm saying is alleged. It could be entirely fiction. There's no substantial proof that these things took place. So after Shiro Ishii found out who these Chinese citizens were with anomalous powers, he'd capture them and use them in creating super soldiers. How he did this is he'd take an organ from the person with powers and he'd place it in a soldier, hoping he would gain their abilities. Well, according to a legend, he actually had success in creating 5 super soldiers. These 5 super soldiers became known as the Ping Fang Five. It was July 20th, 1942, just 7 months after the attacks on Pearl Harbor, when an Imperial Japanese Navy sub breaks the surface of the water just off the coast of Northern California. It had become obvious to the Japanese High Command after an embarrassing defeat at the Battle of Midway just a month before that they needed to approach the U.S. in a different way. They knew that after the attacks on Pearl Harbor, they had just a 6-month window where the sleeping giant was still at rest. They figured that just maybe the payload on that submarine could make some sort of difference in the tides of the war. But this was no bomb or biological weapon. It was something much, much more dangerous. These orders came from the top, General Yamamoto himself. But these 5 men were no ordinary soldiers. In previous missions throughout the war, they would deploy them separately. That way they could move among the American populace without being known. But they were desperate, their position in the war looking more grim by the day. Their mission was to take out strategic points all up and down the California coast, but namely San Diego. On the way to San Diego, they were to hit any weapons depots or military bases they could find. The submarine unloaded the group into a small inflatable raft, and then disappeared beneath the waves. As they reached shore, their leader, Lieutenant Mitsuo Kitano, exits the raft. The other 4 follow suit. Nishimura, Ida, move out. Recon the area and be back in 15 minutes with reports of any locations of transport nearby. Honda, Matsui, stay with me. Yes, sir, Ida replied, moving out. They quickly got off the shoreline and made their way into some thick pines just off the beach. As they were walking, suddenly they were spotted. It's the Japanese! It was a couple of hunters. One of them pulled up a Model 8 Winchester semi-automatic rifle and fired at the Ping Fang Five. The hunter's shot was dead on, hitting the one closest to them in the head. As the bullet made contact, it was as if it was hitting inch-thick steel. It just bounced off and fell to the ground. What the hell? Said the hunter. He had no idea. He just shot at somebody that had superhuman abilities. Private Honda then responded with rounds from his Type 99 light machine gun, while Matsui, unseen as a result of his capabilities, fired his machine gun as well. Both hunters fell to the ground lifeless. Move out immediately, said the lieutenant, sure that the rounds would alert local military or police. They retreated to the woods hastily, not knowing that the gunshots had in fact alerted another group. It was the first time that these 6 men had reunited for over 100 years. The Ping Fang Five expected to run into civilians or even military police during the mission, but what they did not expect is to run into a group of men with anomalous powers similar to theirs. It's almost as if them running into each other was planned. They quickly caught the Five's attention, so the lieutenant, not knowing what they were, ordered them to be killed. As the strange foreign soldiers raised their weapons, a man named Carter Brooke from the other group used his geokinesis. A massive slab of stone erupted from the earth in front of them. As they fired, a hail of bullets ricocheted off it. All right, just like old times, a gentleman named Harry said as he raised up his Winchester rifle and took 2 shots at the lieutenant. They both missed, causing the anomalous Kitano to use his powers and summon a bolt of lightning. The lightning struck a tree nearby the men, setting it instantly on fire, but not before one of the bolts jumped to the man standing nearest to the tree. His name was Hota. He was a Sioux man that had been fighting alongside the rest of them for over 60 years. His heart instantly stopped and he fell dead. Hota, one of the men yelled. Damn you all, he said, as he fired his Winchester rifle and hit Honda twice in the chest, the bullets falling to the ground. The piercing sound of gunshots and grenades filled the air as the battle continued on. Then Corporal Ida joined the mix, but his powers were useless as nobody could hear his voice. So he pulled out his sidearm and began firing. But as he was emptying out his magazine, something much larger flew through the air. It was a boulder. This massive projectile thrown by Carter Brooks' geokinesis landed on Ida, squishing his head to a pulp. As the boulder rolled across the beach, Honda and Kitano had to use an evasive mover to get out of the way, it narrowly missing them. As Kitano and Honda got up, everything suddenly went pitch black. While the sun set, shadows lengthened, perfect for Peter O'Brien's Umbra Kinesis. With the battlefield covered in darkness, Peter O'Brien makes his move. He reaches for the suit knife that he got fighting alongside of them decades ago. He snuck up on their leader and lunged at him, attempting to stab him, but at the last second, he moved out of the way. So instead of getting hit in the chest, he got hit in the arm. He yelled out in pain, but he stepped aside and got ready to summon his power. O'Brien's power of creating darkness would put out torches, flashlights, almost anything, but it was no match for a lightning bolt. As it struck, Kitano could see where he was. He pulled up his gun and shot him. O'Brien collapsed in pain, and to make matters worse, the moon began to show. This illuminated O'Brien's skin at night. Now that Brian showed up plain as day, Kitano had the advantage. He walked up, pulled out his sword, and ran it through him. Moving a few hundred yards away through the darkness, Harry seized the Model 8 that the hunter had before he was killed. Grabbing the Model 8 rifle, he ducked behind a couple fallen trees to gather himself. The electric bolt from Kitano disturbed his electrosensories. Once his headache went away, he looks over and sees none other than Peter O'Brien. Peter, thank God you're... Peter drew a handgun that looked similar to the enemy's and fired 3 times into Harry's chest. The man he thought was his friend was actually Nishimura. He was the shapeshifter of the Ping Fang Five. But Harry wasn't done yet. He picked up the rifle he grabbed and fired multiple rounds into Nishimura's chest. Mortally wounded, the imposter wasn't able to keep his shapeshift, and he turned back into his regular self. They both collapse and die from blood loss. Harry! Carter Brooke yells out, I'll kill you all! Carter tapped into all the power he had, disturbing a fault line nearby. Ground began to shake, as if a magnitude 7 earthquake had set in. Massive walls of earth were being thrown upward and downward as Carter fueled his rage. The 3 survivors of the Ping Fang Five fell to the ground. Then suddenly, a fissure opened up near a massive tree. This massive fir tree toppled over, landing on Honda. Even his bulletproof skin couldn't stop it. The tremors slowly dissipated, and he picked up a boulder, ready to crush anybody who survived. That's when a single gunshot rang out, hitting him in the side of the head, killing him instantly. The boulder crashed to the ground and broke into a dozen pieces. He didn't realize that Matsui, hidden by his powers, had a direct shot at him. The massive roar of the earthquake subsided, and it left a short-lived calm. But that silence was quickly broken up by light machine gun fire. A figure identical to Private Honda of the Ping Fang Five was firing at their leader, Kitano. Kitano immediately knew that it wasn't actually Honda, as he had just seen him squished to a pulp. The burst of fire nearly hit the leader, but he immediately dove to the ground. Shapeshifter Sean Geis had taken form of Honda and began firing on teammates. He continued firing until suddenly he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He looked down, and there was a bayonet protruding from his sternum. Kisama wa Honda, Janai, is what Private Matsui said as the shapeshifter fell to his knees. This concluded the epic encounter none of them expected. There was much loss on both sides. 2 of the Ping Fang Five made it, and only 1 of the other anomalous team made it. Private Matsui and Lieutenant Kitano had no idea that one of the opposite team survived. A gentleman on Harry Yount's team, known as Eric, retreated when he saw that one of their team members had the same powers as him. As Eric retreated, he pondered over his situation, looking to fight with the government that he once so condemned. This war was not my war, but they made it my war, and they will die for their crimes, so says I, Eric. Lieutenant Kitano said this changes nothing. Our mission is still on, and we will succeed. And that concluded the epic battle that took place on the northern shores of California between 2 anomalous groups of human beings. Of course, this is alleged fiction, as it is actually an SCP. I didn't state that at the beginning because I didn't want to lose people by saying it's an SCP. But those of you that know or are at all familiar with SCPs? Bigfoot, for example, is an SCP. The way the Secure, Contain, and Protect protocol was written was they allowed authors to chime in and compile stories from all over the world, whoever wanted to take part, right? Well, like Wikipedia, a lot of people went on to say, well, that's not credible. You just have random people making up fiction. Well, you also have the opposite side of that spectrum. Oftentimes, members who can't get the word out, or the only way they know how to tell information happen to stumble upon, was in fact through SCPs, disguised as fiction. Is this story that? I don't know, but I love the story. So yeah, you heard me right. The Ping Fang Five and the other group is a SCP. And considering I might do a part 2 type thing to this video because there's actually more to the Ping Fang Five. There's actually another battle that takes place with them against Chinese. So I'm going to save that story for then. But the other group, I'll let you know who they are. They are SCP-5700. The story behind this group of anomalous beings is absolutely amazing. It's so fascinating. This group of beings gained their anomalous abilities in 1873 at Yellowstone Park during the wintertime. The group was led by a gentleman named Harry Yount. He was a white Western settler who led 4 white men into the areas of the indigenous people. Throughout his journeys west, Yount was absolutely disgusted by the atrocities the white men were committing on the indigenous populations. His tipping point when 2 of his men, Carter Brooke and Sean Novak, held a Sioux man and his daughter captive at gunpoint. He had had enough. He disarmed them and declared that he would no longer fight for the white American forces, that he was going to help protect the indigenous people against the slaughter. He allowed both of the Sioux native captives into the group, and as they were heading out west to reach the Nez Perce tribe, they ran into another figure, a entity of sorts. The said entity was a nature deity, and she actually saw what Harry Yount and his men were doing for the native people. So said entity, which I believe was actually Mother Nature, granted each of them abilities. These abilities ranged from geokinesis to hydrokinesis. This crew fought their last battle in 1880, when the Shoshone people were getting decimated by U.S. Army gunfire. This caused Group 5700 to retreat back to Yellowstone Park, where the Sioux man's daughter was shot and killed. It's said that when Nahimana was killed, her ability of hydrokinesis went wild, and it actually created one of the geysers at Yellowstone National Park. Of course, this is said to be fiction, made up, but whoever made it up, man, I love it. It's an awesome story, regardless of whatever truth it is. Just enjoy it. It's awesome. So there you have it. What do you guys think? Could this possibly have happened? I mean, the whole scenario from the Ping Fang Five to them fighting the 5700 crew? And do you believe that humans can have anomalous abilities? Comment what you think below, fam. Thank you for tuning in. This has been a great story. I hope you enjoyed. Stay in the love, stay in the light. Treat others how you want to be treated. And I am out.